Hi everyone. So to continue with what we were talking about last week, where we mentioned the 5 different stages of World War I, this week we're going to be looking at one of the battles in particular, the Battle of the Somme. This was one of the biggest and bloodiest battles not only just in World War I, but in world history as a whole. So to begin with, we need to take a look at both when and where the battle was fought. So if we take a look at this timeline, we can see the chief events of World War I, beginning over here with Archduke Franz Ferdinand being assassinated, or what you like to refer to as the Sandwich. And then the war beginning properly, just here, July 28th, and Great Britain joining the fight not too much later, on August 4th, 1914. Now the Battle of the Somme started on July the 1st, 1916, and lasted until November of that same year. So let's look at a map. Right, here we go. Now I know that this can be a bit confusing, so feel free to rewind this part of the video as much as you want until you understand the main events. So first of all, this green map on the right here is just a zoomed in version of just this part of France right here where you can see that red pointer. This line here is the British front line. This orange line, this solid orange line, is the British front line as of the 1st of July 1916. And this dotted line, just along here, is the German line at the same point. So let's talk a bit about the events of the battle. By this stage, the war had been raging for nearly 2 years. Both desperate to end the war, both the French and the British forces decided to wage a massive offensive near the River Somme in northern France, and they were ready to wipe out the Germans. The battle itself started on June the 24th, with a week-long artillery bombardment of the German lines, where 1,738,000 shells were fired at the Germans. The use of artillery was heavily supported by Field Marshal Haig, who you can see right here. This was Britain's commander-in-chief during the Battle of the Somme. On the other hand, General Foch, the commander of the French army, believed that an attack of the Somme would achieve very little. The logic behind the attack itself was the idea that the artillery guns would destroy the German trenches and the barbed wire placed in front of the trenches. This would weaken the Germans significantly so that the British and French could then go in and wipe them out. However, the Germans had very deep dugouts, spelled like this, which meant that they could just move into the safety of these very deep trenches and just wait for the artillery bombardment to stop. And as soon as these bombardments stopped, the Germans would have known that the opposing military were about to advance, which meant that the Germans were prepared to man their guns and attack. On the morning of June the 1st, the British began to march towards the German lines, thinking that their artillery bombardment had been successful and that they would just be able to walk in without a problem. They were armed with only rifles and bayonets. Meanwhile, the Germans had machine guns and they were comfortable in their trenches. The battle was an absolute slaughter. Nearly 60,000 British soldiers were killed on that first day. If you look here, 60% of officers involved in that first day were killed. The French advance was more successful, as they had more guns and faced weaker defences. But they were unable to exploit this without British backup. So you might remember that one of the 5 key stages of war that we mentioned in class last week was the battle of attrition, i.e., the part of the war where everyone just tried to wear everyone else down. Lord Kitchener, who we'll speak about more soon, was a big fan of this idea of attrition. He believed that success at the Somme was of the utmost importance. However, it was a failure and had dire political and social consequences back home in Britain, and we'll be discussing this more in class. In the end, more than 1 million soldiers were killed in this battle alone. So I'll leave you with this, coming from a machine gunner at the Battle of the Somme. He says, "The next morning, we gunners surveyed the dreadful scene in front of us. It became clear that the Germans always had a commanding view of no man's land. The British attack had been brutally repulsed. Hundreds of dead were strung out like wreckage washed up to a high water mark. Quite as many died on the enemy wire as on the ground, like fish caught in a net. They hung there in grotesque postures. Some looked as if they were praying. They had died on their knees, and the wire had prevented their fall. Machine gun fire had done its terrible work."